They say that some stories aren't meant to be told. Whispers passed down from one unlucky soul to the next, like a curse that spreads through words. This is one of those stories. It happened to a friend of mine, or at least he was my friend before the city took him. I haven't heard from him in years, not since that night when he showed up at my door, soaked in sweat, eyes wild with terror. He told me everything, every detail, every chilling moment. And when he was done, he left without saying goodbye, like the story had finally consumed him. I haven't seen him since. He had been on a trip, though to where exactly he never explained. Maybe it was a road trip gone wrong or some kind of work thing, I don't know. All I know is, one night he found himself driving down a road he didn't recognize, past mile after mile of endless forest, until out of nowhere the trees broke and he was at the edge of a city. But this city wasn't on any map. It wasn't a place you just ended up. It was like it had been waiting for him. He tried to turn back, of course. Who wouldn't? But no matter which direction he drove, the roads always seemed to loop back toward the city, like it was pulling him in. He had no choice but to stop and explore. He had to find answers. When he first told me the story, I didn't believe him. I mean, who would? He talked about streets with no names, buildings that shouldn't exist, and sounds that followed him wherever he went. But it was his eyes, those hollow, haunted eyes, that told me he wasn't lying. I've never forgotten the way he described that night. How the city seemed so familiar, yet so wrong. How it was empty except for the things lurking in the shadows. And the worst part, the part that still gives me nightmares, was what he saw before he lost consciousness. That creature. And the reactor. It was only after he woke up that he realized where he had been. Chernobyl. The city of ghosts. The heart of one of the world's worst disasters. But how did he get there? And how could he have escaped a place no living soul should be able to enter? He never had answers, and neither do I. I don't even know if he's still alive out there somewhere trying to outrun the city's grip. But if you ever find yourself on a road you don't recognize, in a place that feels like it shouldn't exist, turn around. Don't go looking for answers. Some stories like this one are better left untold. I don't remember how I got here. It's like I blinked and suddenly I was standing at the entrance of this city. Abandoned. Silent. Forgotten. The streets stretched out endlessly in front of me, cracked and worn, lined with decaying buildings. I stepped forward, my breath hitching as a breeze passed, sending dust swirling in lazy spirals. It had been years since anyone set foot here, that much was obvious. Everything about this place felt off. The gas station was the first building that caught my eye. Its large neon sign, half of it flickering weakly, read, "Fuel up." But there were no cars, no people. The pumps were rusted, and an old soda can lay crushed by the door, caked in grime. The glass windows of the station store were grimy, but through them I could make out shelves stocked with faded, dusty products. Chips, soda bottles, and newspapers from a time long forgotten. It felt as if whoever had last visited had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't help but be drawn toward it. Something about this place gnawed at me. Maybe it was the eerie familiarity, the layout, the architecture. It reminded me of home, of places I'd been before, but there was something off. As if the angles of the buildings bent slightly wrong, or the colors were just a shade too dull, as though the city had been drained of life. I reached the door of the gas station and pushed it open. The sound of the creaking hinge echoed in the hollow emptiness. Inside, the air was thick, stagnant, and the faint scent of gasoline clung to the walls. I scanned the aisles, my eyes catching sight of an old magazine on the counter, its cover yellowed and curling at the edges. June 1987. The last time someone lived here? Maybe. Or maybe even earlier. I ran a hand through my hair, suddenly aware of how loud my breathing was in this suffocating silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There was a strange pressure, like the weight of 1,000 eyes watching, yet I was alone. I was certain of it. Wasn't I? Just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A sound. It started faint, almost like the wind through the cracks of the door, but it wasn't. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. A soft, shuffling noise like footsteps. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, eyes scanning the store, but no one was there. The sound grew louder, closer, creeping through the walls, surrounding me. Panic clawed its way up my throat as I realized it was coming from the ceiling, from above, as if something was crawling, moving directly above me. Then it stopped. Complete silence fell, and I stood frozen in the middle of the store, every muscle tensed, heart hammering in my chest. I knew I needed to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the city had its claws in me now, pulling me deeper into its forgotten grip. The silence stretched on, almost deafening now, and then, thump. A loud, sudden bang like something heavy had just dropped right above me. Dust fell from the ceiling, spiraling in the stale air. My skin crawled as the noise shifted again, this time a dragging sound. Slow. Deliberate. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, slamming it open and bursting into the street. I stumbled out into the open air, gasping for breath, but the sound, it was still there. I could hear it outside now, echoing off the empty buildings, filling the void. I looked around wildly, expecting to see someone, something, but there was nothing. Just that horrible, persistent noise. I started walking faster, then running, moving down the street toward the center of the city, desperate to escape whatever was making that sound. But the further I went, the more familiar everything became. The diner on the corner, the grocery store, the post office. I had been here before. This place. These streets. No, that's impossible. I couldn't have. Could I? The sound followed me, growing louder now, pressing in on all sides, a whispering, scraping noise that crawled under my skin, driving me mad. I ran until I reached the center of the city, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my ears. I stopped in front of a massive, decayed statue, its face worn smooth by time, staring down at me with hollow, eyeless sockets. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. The silence was worse. I didn't know how long I had been running, but I was exhausted. My legs felt like lead and every breath burned in my chest. The city seemed endless, a maze of abandoned streets and crumbling buildings, all twisted into some nightmare version of places I swore I recognized. But that sound, that relentless crawling noise, had stopped, and for now I needed to find somewhere safe. Somewhere to hide. Somewhere to sleep. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows over the broken pavement. I spotted a building ahead, a rundown apartment complex, its windows shattered, doors barely hanging from their hinges. But it would do. I stumbled toward it, my body screaming for rest, and pushed through the creaking door. Inside, the smell of mildew and rot hit me like a wave, but at least it was shelter. I climbed the stairs, my footfalls echoing through the desolate halls, and found a room near the top floor that seemed intact enough. The door was still on its frame, and though the bed was covered in a thick layer of dust, it looked sturdy. I collapsed onto the mattress, the springs groaning under my weight, and for the first time since I'd found myself in this forsaken place, I allowed my eyes to close. Sleep came quickly, but it was uneasy. My dreams were filled with fragments of memories, of places I knew but couldn't place, of faces blurred and distorted, like they were melting in the heat of some invisible fire. I kept hearing that sound, scraping, crawling, dragging, and in my dream I was running again. Always running. Then a noise shattered the silence of the night. I woke with a start, my heart thudding in my chest. For a moment I lay there trying to figure out what had pulled me from sleep. There it was again, a faint, distant rumble like something heavy crashing far off. I sat up, wiping the sweat from my brow, and listened. A low, almost guttural growl drifted through the cracked window. Slowly I rose to my feet, moving toward the window to get a better view of the streets below. The city was still, bathed in an eerie, silver light from the moon. But then, something shifted in the shadows, near an alleyway across the street. At first I thought it was a dog, a stray maybe. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized how wrong I was. The thing was hunched over, its limbs too long, its skin pale and taut, stretched across its bones like a corpse left in the sun for too long. Its face, if you could call it that, was twisted and deformed, half of its jaw hanging loose, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. It sniffed the air, twitching and jerking as if it were listening for something. For me. My stomach lurched. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What the hell is that? The sound, the distant rumble, came again, and this time, it was followed by a faint orange glow on the horizon. I could just make out the silhouette of something massive in the distance, barely visible through the haze of the night. A tower, crumbling and blackened, with jagged remnants of steel twisting out like the broken bones of a giant. A reactor. I felt a cold dread settle over me as I pieced it together. This wasn't just any city. This place, these ruins, it was Chernobyl. The infamous disaster zone. The city forgotten by time, poisoned by radiation, left to rot. But how? How could I be here? I had never been to Chernobyl in my life. Yet everything around me screamed its truth. The abandoned streets, the twisted nature, the silent, oppressive air that clung to my skin. The creature outside growled again, and I tore my gaze from the distant reactor to see it staring directly at me now, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. My breath caught in my throat as it began to move, slowly at first but then faster, sprinting on all fours like some grotesque, rabid beast. I barely had time to react. It charged across the street, its long, skeletal limbs propelling it with horrifying speed. My body screamed at me to move, but I was frozen, trapped in the nightmare of what was coming. The last thing I saw before everything went black was its twisted, gaping maw inches from my face, and the sound of bones snapping filled the air. Then nothing.